only 3 or 4 weeks later, he emailed me, or actually probably wrote me a letter at that point. Email wasn't that much used, and said, I've got a job in Papua New Guinea, would you like to go? And that kind of set me on my path.
Wow.
I went out to Papua New Guinea to set up a clinical research unit there. We're focusing mainly on malaria, and the funding of the job was to set up malaria. But when I got there, working in Port Moresby, the capital, but wandering around the country as well, the reality was that 25% of the beds on our ICU were occupied by snakebite patients. And so it was a disease I knew nothing about. It wasn't something I'd had any particular interest in. When Professor Worrell had talked about it, I thought that's kind of vaguely interesting. But as a clinical issue, it became just in front of me. And that kind of sparked a real desire to look at snakebite.
You're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for all things public health and global health, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the social determinants of health, as well as interesting dialogues about the diverse career opportunities that exist in these fields. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so other people like you can benefit from our content. Picture this. You're a young doctor, you go to a lecture, you're debating whether to wait in line to talk to the speaker or just head out to the pub. You decide to wait. That one decision changes the entire trajectory of your career and leads you to work on one of the most neglected health crises on the planet. That's exactly what happened to Professor David Lalloo. He's now the Vice Chancellor of the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and he spent decades working on a disease that kills more people than you'd think, affects the poorest communities on Earth, and yet barely anyone talks about it. It's called snakebite envenoming. But before we get into the crisis itself, we need to understand how someone ends up dedicating their life to solving a problem that most of the world ignores, because the path to global health work is rarely straightforward. It's full of chance encounters, split-second decisions, and the willingness to take risks. On January 30th, 2026, the globe will observe World Neglected Tropical Disease Day, and this series is about one of the most neglected diseases of all. From PHI Media, I'm Gordon Thane, and what you'll hear in this first chapter is Professor Lalloo's origin story, how a trip to Papua New Guinea opened his eyes to a crisis hiding in plain sight, how 25% of ICU beds were filled with snakebite patients, and how it took decades for the global community to even recognize this was a problem worth solving. Dr. Lalloo, welcome to the Public Health Insight Podcast.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
I'm excited that you're here as well to talk about something that I'm deathly terrified about, but I want to get to know you first. So, David, let's rewind to your earlier days as a youth. What were you genuinely curious about during that time, and what did you think the adult version of you would be doing?
It's interesting. So my dad was a GP, and I think from a very early age, I knew I wanted to do medicine. I remember being fascinated, even at the age of 9, about medicine and people and diseases, and reading some of his medical journals. So I was fairly clear from quite a young age that I wanted to do medicine.
Interesting. Now, you started to study medicine, but medicine itself is such a broad field within fields and specialties, subspecialties. How did you get to the point where you are now, where you're sort of a doctor, but you're also focused on global health issues? How did that all come together?
Well, certainly not by design, but one of my challenges, I think, and it's a nice challenge to have, is I've enjoyed every aspect of medicine that I ever encountered, both as a medical student and then as a young junior doctor. About 3 or 4 years after qualification, I was thinking about which area of specialty I wanted to go into. I was clear that I wanted to specialize rather than be a general practitioner or a family practitioner. And there were several things I was thinking about. I'd always been interested in infection. It was one of the 2 or 3 options I had at the time. And I'd also been very interested in different cultures. And in the UK, at that time, certainly many medical students spent 3 or 4 months off in other countries on their medical electives. I'd happened to have gone to Papua New Guinea, again, almost by chance, because a mate said, "Do you want to come along?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" Not knowing much about it. I really enjoyed both the kind of medicine I was seeing, which of course at that point was very dominated by infection, but also the engagement with different cultures, the way that different cultures and different perspectives impacted on their understanding of disease and how they saw disease. And so I was thinking about going overseas again and thinking about infectious disease as a career. It's one of those moments. I talk to quite a lot of young scientists and young doctors, and they say, how do you get to X, Y, and Z? And I think most people get there by accident, but they get there by taking opportunities when they come along and sometimes just taking a risk. So I went along to a lecture at the Royal College of Physicians on medicine. And at the end of that, there was in fact a talk on snakebite given by the professor at Oxford University, Professor David Lalloo, who's well known as one of the, I think, the most knowledgeable people about snakebite in terms of research in the world. And I wasn't particularly interested in snakebite at that point. I thought I was interested in infection. It was all a bit random. But I was interested in going overseas. And so after the lecture, I went down to talk to him. And I remember vividly about 2 or 3 people in front of me. And it was a real split decision. Shall I wait or shall I just go to the pub? And I decided to wait and spoke to him, usual thing, send me your CV. And to be honest, I thought that would be it. Only 3 or 4 weeks later, he emailed me, or actually probably wrote me a letter at that point. Email wasn't that much used, and said, yeah, I've got a job in Papua New Guinea. Would you like to go? And that kind of set me on my path. I went out to Papua New Guinea to set up a clinical research unit there, focusing mainly on malaria. And the funding of the job was to set up malaria. But when I got there, working in Port Moresby, the capital, but wandering around the country as well, the reality was that 25% of the beds on our ICU were occupied by snakebite patients. And so it was a disease I knew nothing about. It wasn't something I'd had any particular interest in. When Professor Worrell had talked about it, I thought that's kind of vaguely interesting. But as a clinical issue, it became just in front of me. And that kind of sparked a real desire to look at snakebite. And in fact, all my research interests, which include malaria and complex meningitis, like cryptococcal meningitis, have come from the 3 most common diseases, working on those wards in Port Moresby quite a long time ago.
And how long were you there for?
It was about just under 3 years, essentially.
Wow.
Enough time to study quite a lot of malaria patients and a lot of snakebite patients at that point.
Now, you mentioned those opportunities where you get to talk to young scientists and help provide them with a different perspective. I think this is important because young people in many cases are the present and the future. And in many cases, they're the ones that will be shaping the world as we know it 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And maybe in this present moment, they're not appreciative of the gravity and the weight that holds. So if you got the chance to go to a high school at career day and you were asked to maybe share 3 key milestones about your journey in your career so far, what would those 3 milestones be?
The first 2 are easy. The first one, I think, is do what you enjoy. If you enjoy what you're doing, whatever that is, that makes actually any job, hobby, so much more fun. So find out what you enjoy and try and do that. And I recognize that many people are not lucky enough to be able to do that. But if you have that option, I think it's fantastic. The second bit is sometimes you have to take risks. And if you want an interesting life, then you will have to take risks. The right opportunities don't always come along at the right time. And sometimes you just have to go for it. And that leads you very interesting places. It leads you places where you may never thought you'd get to. The third thing is I don't think you can plan things a long way ahead. I think you make decisions, you do something, and other things open up. And again, I recognize that I've been very lucky to be in an area where those have opened up. Not everyone gets those chances. But if you do, and you take them, it can lead you to some very exciting stuff.
Now, I wanted to go back to something that you said that was a bit surprising to me in your time in Papua New Guinea with the 25% of ICU beds being related to snakebite and venoming. And now you fast forward from there to now where there's an established global snakebite task force. And I understand even that in of itself was a journey to get there. Can you tell me the backstory of Global Snakebite Task Force and how it came to be?
Yes, so this is now moving on quite a few years.
Yeah.
And interestingly, and I think indicative actually, It's only relatively recently that I've been able to spend a lot of my time in terms of research on snakebite. So the vast majority of my career has not been on snakebite. I've kept the interest, but in terms of getting research grants, it's been secondary to other infections and clinical trials. There's been, obviously, over the last 30, 40 years, a great interest in neglected tropical diseases. But snakebite was never really included in that initially. There's a great quote from Kofi Annan, who was actually one of the catalysts to start to put snakebite back on the map, which is it's the most important tropical disease that you've never heard of. Initially, there was quite a lot of reluctance to include snakebite as a neglected tropical disease because it was very different from most of the others. Okay. Most of them are infections. Most of them you can have a reasonable path through to either eradication, elimination, or prevention via vaccines. It's not really a disease, it's almost an accident. It falls very much between two stools of a disease caused by a process or an accident, as you see with a car or a traffic accident. And so it didn't really fit very neatly into those categories. Then in around 2017, helped by Kofi Annan's interest in this, there was a real initiative to push WHO to get neglected tropical diseases back on, or actually onto the official list. And that led subsequently to a clear WHO road plan for snake.
I have a fun, spontaneous segment that I didn't tell you about because I wanted to see the look of surprise on your face.
Oh dear, okay.
Now,
that sounds bad.
If this goes well, you'll stick with me for the rest of the episode. And if it doesn't, maybe you won't. But I think you will. You ready for it?
Right, certainly am.
Right, so welcome to Insight Blitz, which is the rapid fire segment where I will ask you questions or read some brief statements to get your brief responses.
Okay.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
So the first one, you mentioned the interest in medicine at an early age because of your father. If that was off the table, or picture David in a parallel universe, what would you be doing instead?
Generally, no idea. Really have no idea.
Actually, that's an answer. That's a good answer. What experience, book, paper, or talk most shaped the way that you think now, if you can remember?
That's a really difficult one. Because I would absolutely say that it's accumulation of experiences that have shaped me. And particularly, I think for me, it's been talking to many different people around the world. That's, again, for me, has been one of the great privileges of tropical medicine global health. The ability to talk to many different people from different cultures and get insight into their culture. And you take a bit from all of those cultures. I really don't think there's been one individual or one thing that shaped me.
Fair enough. You're hosting a dinner party with your personal heroes, past or present. There are 4 seats. You're in one of them. Who are the other 3 at the table with you?
So I think Kofi Annan would be one of those, actually, for all of the things that he did. I would like also see one of the early medics, people like Jenna, who has kind of really changed medicine in the way. I know it's a cliche, but I guess most people say this with somebody like Nelson Mandela. And 4th one would probably be a sportsman. Not quite sure which one. Someone, again, would give me a completely different perspective. I have to think which sports person that would be.
All right. If you could wave a wand and make one thing easier in global health tomorrow, what would it be?
Oh, access to care. Giving everyone, particularly in low and middle-income countries, access to the right care they need would transform their lives. It would transform the country's economies. It would actually transform a lot of world politics, because so much of what we see is driven by power imbalances, economic imbalances. The link between health and economic development is well proven. They're just entwined. If you have a healthy population, you get economic development, and I think reduces some of the tensions that we're all facing at the moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. True or false, snakebite envenoming is a wildlife problem?
False.
Why?
It's a human problem when they encounter wildlife.
Point taken. What's one question that you wish journalists, reporters, podcasters, or if people in the media would ask about your field more?
I think it's probably what can we do better? I think we're in a very interesting time. Podcasts now are kind of getting to the point where they're maybe as important as standard print media that we've known for many, many years. But how, as we health professionals, do we use the media to really try and get our messages over? How do we use that expertise? How do we use the media to try to tackle vaccine hesitancy? There are lots of ways in which I think the health profession needs help in communication, and you guys are the experts in that.
All right. And lastly, what's the worst piece of advice that you've ever gotten? You don't have to say by who.
Don't do that. Don't take a risk, I think.
Don't take a risk. Okay.
Don't take the risk.
Which is the opposite of what you've been doing.
Absolutely.
So that's Professor David Lalloo's journey. From reading his dad's medical journals as a 9-year-old, to almost skipping a lecture to go to the pub, to then finding himself in Papua New Guinea, staring at ICU wards filled with snakebite victims. And here's what strikes me about his story. He didn't set out to become a snakebite expert. He stumbled into it. But once he saw the problem, once he saw those patients, he couldn't unsee it. That's how a lot of global health work happens. You encounter something that shocks you, something that doesn't make sense, something that feels fundamentally unfair, and then you decide to do something about it. But recognizing a problem is just the beginning. Getting the world to care, that's the hardest part. It took until 2017 for snakebite to even be recognized as a neglected tropical disease. Decades of advocacy, decades of patients suffering in silence. And even now, with that recognition, the funding doesn't match the burden. The solutions aren't reaching the people who need them. Crisis continues. Coming up next, we dive into that crisis, the actual experience of getting bitten, the desperate journey to find care, the broken supply chains, the antivenoms that aren't widely available or accessible, the disabilities that don't show up in death statistics, and the massive funding gap that keeps this problem invisible. That's next time on the Public Health Insight Podcast. This show was edited by me, Gordon Thane, with additional editing from LaShawn Benedict. Sound design and mixing by myself and LaShawn Benedict. The original music from The Music Room, composed by Tom Fox, licensed from Johnny Harris. The cover art design for our show by LaShawn Benedict. The Public Health Insight Podcast is produced by PHI Media. Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. See you in the next one.